Whose side it was on?
They knew all along that once the ink was dry on the agreement with the people of the United States, that they were not going to accept the role of the government in an oversight capacity. That's why they have legal departments. That's why they hire lobbyists. That's why they contribute to campaigns. That's why they hire lawyers. And they were intent that they were going to run this system their way. After all, they were the power in the country.
In the Shetland Islands, the oil companies have never had it all their own way. Before the first drop of oil was pumped into Sullomvo, the local council had secured unique powers under a special act of parliament.
The key to our power is our involvement in it, in the sense that we are a harbour authority, that we are landlords, and we are a planning authority, and whenever an issue is raised with BP, we raise it on a variety of fronts, and there's a variety of ways that we get involved in seeing that, from a democratic point of view, that Shetland's interests are preserved and maintained, and it's not just subservient to BP's particular demands at that time.
But the council didn't get it right first time. Sullomvo had its own disaster, just a few weeks after it opened. It taught Shetland a lesson about BP's promises. The anti-pollution system BP had set up for Sullomvo was supposed to be the best, but it wasn't. On the 30th of December 1978, an Exxon tanker collided with a jetty and spilled almost 1,200 tons of fuel oil. BP was supposed to clean up the mess, but the equipment was missing, faulty, or inadequate, just like the Exxon Valdez.
Many shortcomings in the anti-pollution measures at Sullomvo were exposed at a very early stage in the terminal's operations. The council, together with the industry, and certainly with the very willing cooperation of the industry, reappraised the measures to be in place in Sullomvo for the remainder of its operation, and as a result, very considerable expenditure, additional expenditure, and equipment and fixed provision against pollution were put in place to ensure that should something similar happen in future, the ability to control and clean up the consequent mess would be more effective if it happened again.
Did BP or any of the other Alyeska partners ever come to your department and say, look, we've had a spill in Shetland and we've learned some lessons from it. Maybe you ought to know about this so we can apply those lessons right here in Valdez?
Not to my knowledge. In fact, other lessons they've learned at Sullomvo with ballast water treatment and air quality, they don't bring to Valdez. In fact, when we tell them about how they do it over there, they argue with us over here. Says it doesn't apply.
19 years ago, BP made a promise to Alaska. They said their operations in Prince William Sound and Port Valdez would be the safest in the world. And they said this: the contingency plan which will be drawn up will detail methods for dealing promptly and effectively with any oil spill which may occur, so that its effect on the environment will be minimal. In a confidential Alyeska memo, written 3 months after the Exxon Valdez disaster, a company lawyer described this promise as unfortunately broad.
They made a promise that they would keep in place state-of-the-art technology. They haven't done that. And you could maybe excuse that if the technology was out of reach or it didn't make sense or it hadn't been tried. But here you had one of the major partners in the consortium that runs the Alaska oil system, that runs the Prince William Port, that runs the Alaska pipeline system, a major partner that also operates what is considered a state-of-the-art facility at Sullomvo in Scotland, and knew that they could operate under those conditions. And yet every time that it was proposed by the Alaska State Legislature or the Alaska Department of Environment or the Department of Interior or the United States Coast Guard or the United States Congress that improvements be made, they said they couldn't operate, that they couldn't afford it, that they just couldn't operate under those conditions. And yet we find that in Scotland they were operating exactly under those conditions, the kind of conditions that they so readily agreed to the morning after the Exxon Valdez went ashore, The morning after, 10 million gallons of oil was floating around Prince William Sound. They said, oh, we can have tug escorts, we can have barges in place, we can have overflights, we can operate only in the daytime. Sure, you should be able to close down the port. Where were they? Where were they the preceding decade? Where were they the day before the Exxon Valdez report? They were operating under one set of criteria in Scotland and lobbying and politicking against that criteria in Prince William Sound. And not only were they doing it then, they're doing it today in the United States Congress. British Petroleum has been banging on the heads of members of Congress from Ohio, from anywhere they have a facility, telling them that this is the death of British Petroleum if they have to operate under the same rules of negligence that they have to operate under Scotland. How can they do it there and not in the United States of America?
We wanted to ask BP about these issues. Unfortunately, they were unable to talk to us. We received this reply from BP's Manager of Government and Public Affairs in London.
We have been firmly advised by our US legal counsel that we should not participate in such a program, while the Exxon Valdez incident is the subject of extensive litigation in the US courts.
Who do you think should really be on trial here?
The Seven Sisters, the oil companies. BP, Exxon, Arco, the lesser partners should be on trial. They're the ones that made the promises. They're the ones that didn't follow through. They're the ones that put Joe Hazelwood at the controls of the ship, and he shouldn't have been put at the controls of the ship. They're the ones that have lobbied the Coast Guard and everyone else in the United States to have less restrictive laws. Joe Hazelwood was only the poor dolt at the controls.